Welcome to Real Conversations with Patricia Baranovsky-Schneider, the podcast that takes you on a journey around the world to meet some of the most inspiring and accomplished individuals. Discover their stories, uncover invaluable business lessons from their paths to success, and gain exclusive insights on how to apply their strategies to elevate your life and business.
Hello, and welcome to Real Conversations with Patricia. I'm your host, Patty Baranovsky-Schneider. So today I'm joined by Andy Semotiuk, an author, Forbes columnist, past UN correspondent, and TV producer. So welcome, Andy. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, thanks. Well, first of all, I'm delighted to be on your program.
Thank you.
Well, I was born in Canada, raised half in Canada, half in the United States. I grew up in Edmonton, Alberta, a very cold place where you needed to have a block heater in the winter to keep your car running.
Oh, no.
But I went to high school in Los Angeles, and my life seems to have followed that road. Half the time in Canada, half in the United States. So, for example, I practiced 10 years in Los Angeles, 5 years in New York, and now I'm in Toronto practicing with Pace Law Firm.
Nice. Wow. Jack of all trades here. So now tell us, what inspired you to write Solomea, Star of Opera, Solomea, Star of Opera's Golden Age? And can you share what made Solomea, I can't even pronounce the last name, but can you share what made her so compelling and relevant to today's audience?
Sure. Yes. Solomea, her last name was Krushelnytska. Difficult name. Yeah. That's okay. That's okay. She was the star of opera's golden age, a time when opera was the main entertainment vehicle in the world in the first decade of the 1900s.
Okay.
She performed with some of the great opera stars that generally were available then and are known even to this day. If you're in opera, for example, people like Caruso, she performed with him. In fact, she was his mentor. People like Toscanini, who was a conductor and ultimately ended up being the NBC television program conductor for their symphony, but was in Europe back then, in Italy. People like Puccini, who wrote many operas, one in particular that's quite prominent today called Madame Butterfly, which she helped rescue with him. And the reason why I was interested in her is because she's unknown. But there's reasons why she was unknown. And the book is all about, well, what happened to her? Why was she, a leading star of opera, just disappeared? What happened to her? It's a little bit of a mystery. And I talk about it in the book. But I'll just say this. There are many people who aren't interested in opera or don't have any knowledge of opera. The book is also for them. It's not just for opera aficionados. It's also for people who are interested in achievement. So, for example, she rose from obscurity to world fame. She broke the ceiling barrier for women in her time back then. She overcame many hardships to become the person, the leader that she was. So that's a little bit about the book.
Oh, very nice. Now, as you mentioned, it's more than just opera. It's about breaking barriers and achieving greatness. So what lessons can leaders take away from about perseverance and overcoming obstacles, especially for women facing societal challenges?
Okay. Well, there are several things you have to have in order to make it. Let's say in the opera world, we're going to talk about opera world today because that's her world. Okay. But this may very well apply to any, engineer, architect, lawyer, whatever it is. So first is stamina and devotion to something you love. And I think the key to her success is she identified early in her life, what is it that she wants to do with her life, which is one of the key questions we all face in life. There are two main questions philosophers tell us that we are confronted with in our lives. One is, who am I? And the second one is, why am I here? Why am I here? those are difficult questions to answer. It's not just, oh, I'll sit down and have a coffee and write it down on a piece of
Right.
paper. You have to really search inside yourself to figure it out. She
Right.
figured it out early. And it was, I love to sing. Her father said, after an experience early in her life where there was a breakup on a marriage possibility, he turned to her and he said, what do you want out of your life? What is it that you want? And she said, I want to sing. I love to sing. And the father said to her, okay, well, if you're going to sing, we got to send you to school, to opera school. You're going to sing, and that's how she started off. So she loved it. And when you're working in your area of passion, and indeed in her area of unique ability,
Right.
there's no competition. There's no hardship.
Right.
It's you love it. You'll do it for free. You'll travel around the world, which she did for free.
Nice.
Well, not for free in her case. They paid her big money.
Nice.
But it was for her. Now, love, unique ability, talent. You have to have some talent. Like if you don't have talent, you're not going to get very far. Even if you love it, you're not going to get very far.
Right.
So she had talent. But she was an Amazon. She was like athlete. Like she walked a lot, everyday walks. She was very, very strict on her diet. She talked about how she would have loved to have a dessert with coffee and some various foods and so on, but she purposefully said no for the sake of her higher ambition. So that's a partial answer, at least, to the question.
I always admired people like, when I was in school and people would say, oh, I know when I'm grow up, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a lawyer, I always admired that. I mean, I always still to this day say, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. It was like, when I had my first job, I fell in love with it, and that's what I've been doing ever since. But I always admired people who knew early on, what their passion was.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now tell us, how did you research Solomea's life and career, and what were some surprising, memorable discoveries that you made along the way?
Okay. Well, first of all, I should say she was my grandmother's sister, so I'm related to her.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow,
So that's part
nice.
of the reason why.
Okay.
But what we did is we traveled the world. We went to all the opera theaters where she performed. We looked at their archives. The archivists helped us. There's a museum in Western Ukraine dedicated to her memory. The ladies, and there's some passionate, fantastic women there, museum archivists, who opened the museum for us and gave us anything we wanted to write about this
That's so nice.
art. So that's how we sort of accessed it. Plus family stories. There are many intimate family stories in the book that I shared.
That's nice that you were able to, open up and get that. Like my grandmother, she was, my grandfather immigrated from Poland, and she was like one of 15 kids and whatnot. And it was like, as young kids, we didn't have enough concept to say, okay, like my grandmother spoke Polish, never taught my father. And now by the time we realized, oh, you should tell us all about the family, she was going through dementia and whatnot. So we never really got that full story. So that's amazing that your family was able to share that and, bring it down. That's great. So you mentioned that the book provides a model for children and grandchildren. So what specific lessons or values to Solomea's journey do you think are most applicable to young people today?
Okay, well, Solomea is the way you pronounce it. By the way, I just might mention, she was a star in Poland. In fact, we traveled to the Warsaw Opera, and there's a bust there at the opera, her bust, as at the foyer in the opera in Poland. In terms of what can be shared with young people, children, grandchildren, values. What kind of values? Dedication, hard work, choosing a purpose that's meaningful to you, honoring history, the tradition of your calling, learning about it, becoming an expert in your field. One day I went to a Chinese restaurant and I got a Chinese fortune cookie at the end of the meal. I opened the cookie and it said, do one thing really, really well. I thought, wow, what a great piece of advice. And that's what she did. She focused on something, and you can become a world specialist on any topic if you narrow it enough and you spend, let's say, 5 years studying it. you can pretty much become one of the world's expert on pretty much any topic. And in her case, she chose opera, and she studied it from all angles: acting, singing, pronunciation, performing. Also, she knew 60 operas by heart.
Wow.
The score and the words, the lyrics and the music. She spoke 8 languages.
Wow,
8
it's impressive.
languages. Yeah. So, you pick something that's valuable to you, important to you, and values are something that are subjective. There's, by and large, there are some objective values like, peace or love. But by and large, for individuals, they're individual values. You have to choose what values you like. So, for example, in my case, high values for me are things like integrity, honesty, sincerity, love, and you have to choose for yourself. But when you choose your value, you can then explore what does that mean to you in your life? And that's what she did. And that's what kids and grandkids can learn from reading a book like this.
That's pretty impressive, though. I'm still shocked at how many languages she spoke. So now tell us, with 5 published books and years of experience as a columnist and lawyer, how do you balance storytelling with your professional career?
Well, that's one of the big challenges in life, as one thing from my career that I noticed helping young professionals is they're all challenged by one or more of 3 things. And I think it's true for pretty much everybody, you, me, whoever it is. The 3 things, by and large, that people are challenged with are money, time, and balance. And you're asking the balance question. So for in terms of balance, since that's where we're headed, the suggestion I would have is you have to be clear on your values. What is important to you? Because you can't do everything in your life. You may want to, but you can't. So you have to be clear. What is significant for you? What's important? And if you identify what's important, you can lay it out on a piece of paper. For example, health, physical well-being, education, whatever your values are. Put them out on a piece of paper, and then draw a circle and put lines in the circle identifying each one of the values. And then ask yourself honestly, how am I doing when it comes to health? Honestly, on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being in the center of the circle, 10 being on the outer edge of the circle. On that line, how well am I doing? Maybe it's a 7, maybe it's an 8. How am I doing in terms of my spiritual life, for example, if that's a value to you? You might be a 6. How am I doing intellectually? I'm nourishing myself mentally and physically or whatever. And you do that. Then you draw a circle or draw a line around those numbers, and you'll see. If you're in balance, it should be a circle. If instead, when you draw that line around those points, you've got a flat tire, that flat tire is telling you you're out of balance. Now, you can be out of balance for a while. Like, for example, I had to write the bar exams. When I was writing the bar exam, I had no time for anything else. I couldn't do much physical exercise. I couldn't entertain. I couldn't, I had to focus. So I was out of balance for several months. That's okay, so long as you're aware of what you're doing. But you have to come back into balance. That's the key.
Yeah, it is kind of tricky because you see people where they'll start something that they claim to be passionate about, and then halfway through they lose interest. So I could see where that would be, out of balance. And if you were passionate, you do come back to it. You might take a break, but come back. If you didn't, maybe it wasn't right for you in the first place.
Correct. Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Now, as someone who's written several extensively on immigration, what parallels do you see between Solomea's story of rising from obscurity and the immigrant experience that you covered in your career?
Well, the book is all about the immigrant experience because it's not just about her, but it's about her relative to me and my family looking in on her life. And the reason we're looking in on her life is because her career was in Europe, obviously Italy being the center of the opera world, but she traveled worldwide. So, for example, all over Europe, North Africa, Tsarist Russia back in the day, out to Argentina, to Chile, Uruguay, into the United States. So, for example, she was in 1928, she visited New York, Philadelphia,
Wow.
performed in New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, all the main cities. She traveled to Canada. She performed in Montreal and in Winnipeg in Canada.
Wow.
So she traveled worldwide. And, that's sort of a synopsis of her life. And I'm trying to sort of figure out where am I going with this in answer to your question. But
Sorry.
anyway, what was the question again? I kind of went off the road here.
No, just basically what parallels do you see between
Okay,
her
yeah,
story?
the
Yeah.
immigrant paragraph.
Yeah.
Well, let me just tell you a little story about the immigrant side of it. She lived in Italy.
Right.
In 1936, her husband, who was the mayor of the city of Viareggio,
Okay.
died. And that was sort of pre-World War II time period.
Okay.
And being left alone, a widow, and being sort of towards the latter end of her career, she realized, well, I have to kind of consolidate a little bit. She buried her husband. The fascists were rising in Italy at that time, Mussolini and so on. There was some danger for artists at that time. For example, Toscanini, who was the conductor, once Mussolini came to a symphony, and he demanded that Toscanini start with the national fascist anthem, and he refused. And Mussolini gave him a hard time, and he broke his conductor's wand and walked off the stage. And ultimately, he left. Toscanini left for the United States, and I mentioned he became the conductor of the NBC television symphony. There were others, this guy named Ruffo, that was a colleague of hers who had a hard time with Mussolini and the fascists. So she saw that her days were numbered. And in 1939, she thought, well, I'm going to go for a visit to my family. And her family was in what was at one time part of Poland, the eastern part of Poland, but today is part of Western Ukraine, to the city of Lviv. It was called Lvov in Polish.
Okay.
So she, in August 1939, she decided she's going to leave. She's going to close up her villa that she had in Viareggio in Italy, on the western coast of Italy near Milan. Give her key to her friends, neighbors, and travel back to Lviv, Western Ukraine.
Okay.
And she traveled there in August. And while she was there, on September 1st, World War II broke out. Nazi Germany invaded Poland, and she ended up behind the Iron Curtain in the Soviet Union, never to be able to break away from there again. And she lived there from 1939 until 1952 when she died.
Wow.
Behind the Iron Curtain. And to give you a sense of what that meant in her life and our life, I remember as a small child, now I was born in 49, and I remember being about, 7 or 8 years old. I came home one day for lunch in the 50s, and my mother opened a letter that she got while I was there at the kitchen table eating. And she read it, and she said, "Oh, Teta Solomea pomerla," which that was in Ukrainian background, which meant Aunt Solomea has died. And I was in grade 3. I was about 8 years old. It was about 1957, 58. It took about 5 years for news about Solomea to get out from under the Iron Curtain to the West to family members like us.
Wow.
And that's a large explanation of why knowledge about her died.
Yeah.
Whereas these other people like Caruso, who was a famous tenor, or Toscanini or Puccini carried on.
Wow.
But news about her had died. And the Soviet Union wasn't exactly interested in promoting her as, one of theirs. So they made sure that, news was kind of tampered out.
That's terrible.
So that's the story about her. Now, as far as immigration goes, in 1945, she's in the Soviet Union, as are my parents and my grandparents, living with her in the building in view that is her building.
Okay.
The war, World War II, is coming to an end. And there's a dramatic discussion taking place around the kitchen table. Do we leave because the Red Army is invading from the east and the Germans are retreating? Or do we stay and come under Soviet rule? In her case, she was older and was looking after her sister who had an emotional breakdown. And she had broken her hip, and so she was wobbly on her feet. And they had taken away her Italian passport. So she didn't have much to escape to.
Right.
But in my family's case, my grandparents and my mother and my aunt, they decided there's no way we're staying in the Soviet Union. We're escaping.
Right.
And so they escaped. They traveled westward through Poland, onward to Austria, and eventually my mother immigrated to Canada. My aunt immigrated to Los Angeles. And so that whole immigrant experience is detailed in the book as part of the story.
That's like a really deep, deep situation. I couldn't even, and even if she wanted to go, she's kind of stuck. Oh, God,
Yeah.
I can only imagine. Now, I guess going back to you, your career spans journalism, law, public speaking, and writing. So how have these diverse experiences influenced your storytelling and ability to connect with audiences?
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about myself in that regard. When I was in university, first year university, I took English 101.
Okay.
And it was a disaster. I didn't know how to write. I kept getting Fs on everything I submitted. And I spent a whole year trying to write something about a poem called Death by John Donne.
Okay.
And it begins, "Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty, for thou art not so." It's a sonnet. And our English professor, I don't remember, I think, could it be Whitman was his name? I don't know. Whatever his name was, he assigned that project to us. Write an essay on the sonnet Donne. So I wrote the essay, submitted it, got an F back. He said, I went to him, said, "Look, I don't know what's going on." He says, "Rewrite it." So I rewrote it. I kept rewriting it. I rewrote it 5 times, submitted it 5 times. It was obvious that I was not a good writer. And at the end of the year, he took pity on me because he knew if I didn't pass his course, I wouldn't be able to continue on with university. So he passed me with 50%. If he learned today, well, he's dead now probably, but if he learned that I am a Forbes columnist, I've been a Forbes columnist for 10 years and I've published 5 books, he'd roll over in his grave, right? But there's irony in that. And the irony is I never thought I was a writer. And if you look over my shoulder, there's a little plaque up there on the wall. That plaque is from Toastmasters International.
Right.
Toastmasters is a organization that cultivates public speaking and leadership.
Right.
So I joined Toastmasters, and I thought my road would be speaking, making presentations.
Right.
And for 35 years, I attended Toastmasters meetings once a week, club meetings, where I practiced my speaking skills.
Right.
And I listened as other people spoke and other people provided feedback
Right.
to become a better presenter. Because I thought that's where I belong. That's my unique ability. I should go in that direction.
Right.
But the world said, no, 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 Andy, we don't want you in that direction. We want you to write.
Right.
And for some reason, even though I wrote an article here and there for a student newspaper, some essays or, memos and things like that at work, over time, my writing became better and better to the point where I became actually a UN journalist, a correspondent, UN correspondent. And I wrote for a group called Southern News Services, among others. And they were a newspaper chain in Canada with newspapers in several cities in Canada, and they published some of my articles. So I became a UN correspondent. But that was, I was still onto this, speaking thing and about practicing law, which was my sort of career or profession. But as I'm practicing law and writing about immigration, occasionally with a friend here at Pace Law Firm where I work in Toronto, guy named Sean Barry, he would in particular go out and read what other people are writing about immigration and make comments in my name sometimes about what they were saying, or approach me and say, what do you think on this topic? And I would tell him, and then he'd put a comment on. And over time, what happened is one day Forbes noted, what's this guy Andy Semotiuk, he's always commenting on things like that. And they looked me up and they saw my background, my profile, and they emailed me. First time in my life, in my entire life, where anybody ever approached me and said something, like, hey, we want something would you like to write for Forbes?
Wow.
Would I? Of course I would, about immigration. Up until that moment, my whole life was, I'm too tall, I'm too small, I'm too fat, I'm too skinny, I'm too smart, I'm too stupid. I'm not from here, I should be from here and not from there. Whatever it was, there was never a moment when someone opened the door and said, Andy,
you're perfect. Yeah.
Come on in, you're perfect. Go on, sign here.
Wow.
We'll pay you $100,000. Like you hear these stories that everybody's telling. I had no such experience ever. The only experience I had is, well, if you want to write for us, we'll publish your stories.
Yeah.
So I started writing. And I've been writing for 10 years on that subject. That's the journalism. As far as the books are concerned, I believe that if you dig deep enough into anybody's soul, like just asking and talking, you, me, whoever it is, inside them, there's a story aching to be told,
right?
And that they need to tell the world. That's why they're here. That's why they have an independent and different view from everybody else. We as a world are better off when people share their stories with others, not just the good stuff, the hard stuff too, the disappointments, and if they do, we're better off. We learn from that. We learn how to conduct a better life.
Yeah.
And so I started writing, and I told you, Solomea was a family member. She was lost to the world. Nobody knew about her, although she had achieved world fame in her time. She rescued the opera Madame Butterfly, which is one of the top operas today in the world, as an example. So that's, one of the reasons why I wrote that book. And then with respect to The Young Professional, another book I wrote, for example, it's a guidebook for young people entering the professions and so on.
So you're writing about what you're passionate about.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. It's funny because I'm not much of a talker. Like I've been to Toastmasters. I'm like not good at it, but I can write. Like people always say when they read anything I've written, it's like they're talking to me because I can put my heart and soul into what I'm writing. Just don't ask me to speak it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So now,
it just, to each his own or her own, right?
Yeah. Now tell us, Solomea's story is rooted in her Ukrainian heritage. So how has your connection to Ukrainian culture and history influenced your perspective as a writer and speaker?
Okay, so I'm going to go back to a theme I talked about with you earlier that we shared. Two questions. First one, who am I? Second question, why am I here?
Mm.
Who am I? In my case, I had to ask myself, well, who am I?
Mm.
And the answer was, in part, I'm of Ukrainian background. If you're looking for, things to talk about in your life, to get motivated about something, if you can't get motivated, a good place to start is to look at your life and where you came from. Like, how did you get here? Like, what happened? Well, my life, I've mentioned Solomea as an influence in my life and my immigration and so on. But that answer, who am I, included, well, I'm Ukrainian in background. Now, you probably know there's a big war going on and Russia invaded Ukraine. And at this moment, at least 100 Ukrainian soldiers a day are dying on the front, 100. And there's 1,000 Russian soldiers at this moment dying every day on the front. That's what's going on out there.
Right.
And it's a battle. It's a battle over the right to exist, the right to be a Ukrainian.
Right.
People, men and women, will not die for a few $100s or a few $1,000s or even $1 million, but they will die for values, which we talked about. And one value is, who am I? Like, there's a bottom line, a line in the sand that you draw, that this is what I live for, and this is what I'm prepared to die for.
Mm-hmm.
And those people out in the front are prepared to die for that identity which Putin is dedicated to destroy and eradicate from the world.
Mm-hmm.
We're not the only one. Ukrainians are not the only one that are in jeopardy. There are others. I know that Jewish people often talk about, how they are a small little country in the Arab world, and that their existence is in peril, etc. But so are the Palestinians, it appears, from Gaza and so on, right? So there are people who share this kind of mortal danger, and in my case, it kind of was brought to me, like every day. It's brought to me on my computer. News stories flashing across the screen every day. Kharkiv destroyed, invasion in Kiev, hospitals bombed, children taken to Russia, etc. And that story is universal in this sense. It's a story about the international world order, whether it's going to exist or not, rule-based order, or is it going to be a bunch of gangsters running the world? And it's all about sovereignty and independence of states, including Poland, Ukraine, the others, the border states. And it's all about nuclear disarmament. In the case of Ukraine in 1994, under the Budapest Accord, Ukraine had the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world with the breakup of the Soviet Union. And the countries got together, Russia, Ukraine, America, the UK, France, and China, and they had a discussion. And in 1994, they signed the Budapest Accords. And the deal was, Ukraine, you surrender your nuclear arms to Russia, and we guarantee you sovereignty and independence for doing that. And unfortunately, there's a war on. So whether I like it or not, my Ukrainian heritage, and in the book I write about the immigrant experience, that we've talked about it already. It's had a major impact on my life. And,
sure.
In terms of looking forward and the world as it should be in the future, the way I see it, that war has to be won. And Europe has to solidify itself for the sake of the world in terms of boundaries, honoring boundaries, and leading a peaceful life. And America has to step up and help as well. So that's a quick answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like what you say with the news. It's once upon a time, you just had a newspaper. And now with social media, it's everywhere. If it's on your watch, it's on your iPad, on your phone, and especially with the phones now. So it's, like I always try to say, sometimes I don't want to see the news because it's so depressing, but it's everywhere you look. You can't avoid it. Yeah. So now tell us, from your own experience as a Forbes columnist to Distinguished Toastmaster, what are the key elements of achieving professional and personal success?
Well, I'll give you a little set of rules that I think are very valuable for leading a good life. Let's put it that way. And then we'll talk a little bit about success. The rules are this. Number one, do what you promise. Number two, finish what you start. Number three, say what you mean, meaning don't be cynical. Number four, come on time. Number five, be kind. And in terms of success, I think the key to your success, I'll put it this way. Sometimes when I meet with students, for example, sometimes I taught classes at universities or colleges. One of the questions I ask is, what's the purpose of life? Which is kind of success, right? Well, what's the purpose of life? And they give me answers. And the answers are, well, to love, to grow and be as good as you can be, to achieve meaningful goals in, measurable time, answers like that. And I think they're all good answers, to make a lot of money and care for my family, to learn, to create, to procreate, to leave a legacy. That's a good, different. But one that I like is to find your unique, and I think God-given unique talent or skills and put them into the service of others. I think that's a really great answer to the question of, how do you become successful? And that means thoughtful reflection on who you are and what is your life about. And I like this thing. What do you stand for? And what are you prepared to die for in terms of values? I think that's a really key question.
That's a deep question.
I'd like to share one other story, if I may.
Sure.
There was a guy named Karl Wallenda.
Okay.
He was a world tightrope walker.
Okay.
Very famous. And I don't know, about 50 years ago, maybe less, he was walking a tightrope between two high tower buildings in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and he slipped and fell to his death. But before he died, he was interviewed, and a journalist asked him, why on earth do you walk the tightrope? And he gave an answer, and the answer he gave was, all my life, I lead the most important aspect of my life is when I'm walking on the tightrope. And everything else seems to be either a prelude to or a postscript after my life on the tightrope. And he loved that life so much that he was willing to risk his life for the sake of doing it, which led to tragic results. Maybe not all of us are willing to die for what we believe in or what we value or cherish.
Right.
That's asking a lot. Some are, but not maybe everyone.
Right.
But knowing what you live for, why are you doing what you're doing?
Right.
And it may be, listen, immigrants, they come to North America. They got nothing, zero. They got families, and they have to take on jobs, waitress in a restaurant, schlepping coffee or whatever it is.
Right.
That's living for a purpose, but the purpose is not, not to make $12 an hour,
Right.
but the purpose is to look after a family. That's okay.
Right.
That's okay. It doesn't have to be a noble, great, save Mount Rushmore or whatever
Right.
purpose,
Right.
right? It's okay to even have a humble purpose like that. But
Yeah.
just to be clear on what your life is about, I think is really important to think about your life.
Right. It's
Yeah.
something a lot of people don't think of because they're just caught in their mundane everyday, rushing this, and they don't stop and think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now tell us, having published books in various genres, what advice would you give to aspiring writers who want to tell meaningful stories or share their unique perspectives of the world?
Well, we talked a little bit about that. I'm going back to this unique ability business. So, for example, the great people in our lives, people I can think of are, say, like Wayne Gretzky, who was a big hockey star. He forged his life in such a way that basically he spent all his time playing hockey, and everything else was looked after for him. Like he didn't pack his own skates and
Right.
and gear, and get on. People looked after his gear, got him on the bus, took him to wherever the hockey game was, and so on. His job was to play hockey. I read a biography on Elvis Presley. Same deal. He said also, I really only live on stage performing. That's what my life is really all about.
Mm.
And everything else he tried to organize in such a way that, or the people around him, that he did the performing, but everybody else kind of looked after everything else. So again, that goes right back to what is important to you as a writer, right? What values do you love and that you want to share? And what's burning inside you that's aching to come out and be shared with the world? What are you prepared to walk 100 miles for free to do?
Right.
Or maybe not 100 miles, but what are you prepared to do for free until you get the world to notice you and say, hey, that person's writing is good enough that, we'd like to read about his books or her books or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And the key to becoming great is do it over and over again, like that Chinese fortune cookie.
Mm-hmm.
So do one thing really, really well. You want to be a writer? What kind of writer? Maybe you should be just like a horror story writer. Okay, focus on horror stories. Become the best in the world on horror stories, or whatever you choose. But do the best you can and learn everything you can about the genre you're choosing. And write. You want to be a writer? Write. You want to be a singer? Sing. You want to be a hockey player? Play hockey. But don't just do it. Do it right.
Wow.
In other words, learn how to do it best and do it best.
Nice. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Now, anything else you want to talk about that we didn't touch on yet?
No, I think I've shared much of what's in my heart, and you had some excellent questions. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Likewise.
I might mention, if anybody wants to get a hold of me, I'm at Pace Law Firm, Andy Semotiuk at Pace Law Firm. Or I also have a website, a personal website called myworkvisa.com. That's how you could. And all my books are on Amazon if you're interested.
Okay.
Solomea is also an audio book you can get on Amazon as well as the hardcover.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll post all that stuff onto the books and everything like that. I'm excited. I didn't realize you were related, so I think that's amazing. That makes it even more interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thanks again for being on the show. Again, that was Andy Semotiuk. So thanks for listening to Real Conversations with Patricia. Never miss an episode by subscribing to the channel. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Real Conversations with Patricia, talking with some of the most brilliant minds on their journey to success and their recommended strategies. Please leave your feedback and visit pristineadvisors.com to get the latest and greatest business advisement on the planet. Feel free to let me know your thoughts, suggestions, and anything else you'd like me to cover. Together, we can make success happen for all.